At dawn on June 6, 1944, the horizon began to move. From inside a German bunker above Omaha Beach, an officer watches thousands of Allied ships rise from the sea, shattering the myth of the Atlantic Wall. This is not the familiar story of the assault, but of those trapped on the other side facing fear, disbelief, and the moment they realize the war is lost. Stay with this story to witness D-Day, as it was lived inside the bunkers, where certainty collapsed before the first shots were fired.
In every great event, there's always a secret they never told you, hidden behind old maps, silent wars, and forgotten names. The truth is buried, waiting to be revealed. History isn't always what you were taught. Many secrets were hidden, erased, or rewritten. Behind every page, there's a truth waiting to be uncovered. Listen carefully. Welcome to Confidential Facts. Here, hidden history is revealed. Forgotten battles, secret alliances, and untold stories.
In the years leading up to June 1944, the German defense of Western Europe rested not only on concrete and steel, but on belief. The Atlantic Wall was as much a psychological construct as it was a military one. German officers stationed along the Normandy coast were repeatedly assured through briefings, propaganda films, and direct orders that the wall was impregnable, that no Allied force could cross the channel, survive the minefields, breach the obstacles, and overwhelm the bunkers in a single coordinated blow. This belief became a quiet certainty, shaping daily routines and dulling the instinct to imagine catastrophe. Confidential and lesser-known historical detail reveals that many frontline German officers privately doubted parts of the Atlantic Wall's effectiveness, but these doubts were rarely shared upward. Internal Wehrmacht reports from late 1943 and early 1944 noted that large sections of the Normandy defenses were incomplete, understaffed, or built with inferior concrete due to material shortages. However, these reports were often softened or rewritten before reaching high command, creating a dangerous feedback loop where leadership believed its own propaganda. Another little-known fact is that Omaha Beach, later infamous for its bloodshed, was not initially considered a primary invasion target by German planners. Intelligence assessments suggested the Allies would land at Pas-de-Calais, closer to Britain and offering direct routes into Germany. As a result, Normandy received fewer experienced troops. Many units stationed there consisted of older soldiers, conscripts from occupied territories, or troops recovering from wounds facts. Rarely discussed openly among the ranks, but quietly understood. Daily life inside the bunkers reinforced the illusion of stability. Soldiers drilled endlessly, repaired wire, cleaned weapons, and watched the sea. The channel became monotonous. The very absence of action strengthened the belief that the wall worked simply because nothing happened. Ironically, this calm was one of the wall's greatest weaknesses. The lack of constant pressure allowed complacency to take root. A confidential psychological detail emerges from post-war interrogations. Many German officers admitted they feared punishment from their own command more than invasion itself. Hitler's obsession with holding every inch of ground meant that retreat was unthinkable. This created a mindset where survival depended less on tactical flexibility and more on rigid obedience. The wall was not just a defense against the Allies, it was a prison for those manning it. By early June 1944, subtle signs hinted that something was coming. Increased Allied air activity, resistance sabotage of rail lines, and unusual naval movements were observed. Yet these indicators were often dismissed as diversions. German intelligence had been deeply compromised by Allied deception operations, such as Operation Fortitude, a fact that many frontline officers did not learn until after the war. They trusted that if a real invasion were imminent, higher command would know. Thus, on the eve of June 6th, the Atlantic Wall stood firm, not because it was strong, but because it was believed to be the men inside the bunkers slept, confident that history would pass them by. They did not yet understand that belief itself was about to collapse.
Keep moving! We need to secure this sector now!
The first true rupture in the illusion came not with gunfire, but with sight. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, German sentries along the Normandy coast looked out toward the sea and saw something that defied comprehension. The horizon itself seemed to change shape. What initially appeared as a low fog bank slowly resolved into silhouette ships, thousands of them, stretching as far as the eye could see. This moment has been described in post-war German testimonies as unreal, almost dreamlike. One confidential account from a regimental officer at Omaha Beach recalls a silence inside the bunker as binoculars were passed from hand to hand. No one spoke, not because of discipline, but because language failed. The scale of the Allied armada exceeded anything they had been told was possible. A lesser-known fact is that several German officers initially believed they were witnessing an exercise or feint. The sheer size of the fleet conflicted so sharply with intelligence expectations that the mind resisted accepting it as real. This delay in comprehensions, sometimes lasting several critical minutes, meant that some defensive positions were slow to fully man their weapons. Compounding the shock was the failure of communication. Allied bombing and resistant sabotage had severed many telephone lines connecting bunkers to command posts. Radio traffic became chaotic. Orders were contradictory or absent altogether. Some units received commands to hold fire until landing craft were closer. Others were told to conserve ammunition. The lack of a unified response magnified the sense of disbelief. Confidential German naval logs later revealed that Kriegsmarine officers observing the invasion realized almost immediately that it was decisive. Unlike Army commanders, naval officers understood the logistics behind such a fleet. They knew that assembling this many ships meant the Allies had committed everything. This realization that there would be no second chance for Germany in the West spread, quietly but quickly, among those who grasped its significance. As dawn broke, Allied naval guns opened fire. The bunkers shook, concrete cracked, the wall, once imagined as immovable, suddenly felt fragile. Soldiers who had never experienced heavy bombardment found themselves disoriented, nauseous, and deafened. Training did not prepare them for the physical violence of sustained naval artillery. One rarely discussed detail is that some bunkers were rendered ineffective not by direct hits, but by psychological overload. Crews abandoned firing positions temporarily, not out of cowardice, but because shock and concussion made it impossible to function. Later, German medical reports described widespread cases of acute combat stress within the first hour of the invasion. By the time the first landing craft approached Omaha Beach, the battle had already been lost psychologically. The horizon had broken, and with it, the certainty that the Atlantic Wall could protect them.
The bridge was... No, wait! It's gone! Oh!
What are you talking about? It can't be!
Inside the bunkers overlooking Omaha Beach, time fractured, minutes stretched into hours, while events blurred together. Smoke, dust, and the roar of artillery transformed enclosed concrete chambers into suffocating spaces of fear and confusion. Orders came sporadically, often outdated by the time they arrived. Contrary to popular belief, German machine gun crews did not operate with cold efficiency throughout the morning. Ammunition jams, barrel overheating, and damaged optics severely reduced effectiveness. A confidential technical report from the 352nd Infantry Division noted that several key firing positions were partially blinded by dust and debris within the first 30 minutes. Another lesser-known fact is that many German soldiers at Omaha Beach did not know the beach's code name or strategic importance. To them, it was simply their sector. This lack of broader situational awareness contributed to the sense of isolation. They fought without understanding the scale of what was happening beyond their immediate field of fire. Leadership breakdown was critical. Several officers were killed or wounded early, leaving junior NCOs to make decisions under unimaginable pressure. German doctrine emphasized centralized command, and when that command vanished, units struggled to adapt. Some bunkers continued firing long after their positions were tactically irrelevant. Others fell silent too soon. Eyewitness accounts reveal moments of moral conflict rarely discussed. Some German soldiers hesitated when seeing wounded Allied troops struggling in the surf. These moments of hesitation were brief but human. Post-war testimonies describe guilt that lingered long after the war, challenging the simplified image of unthinking defenders. As American troops began to push off the beach and infiltrate the bluffs, the bunkers lost their advantage. Rear entrances poorly defended and often overlooked in planning became vulnerabilities. Several bunkers were neutralized not by frontal assault, but by small infantry teams approaching from unexpected angles. By midday, the defense of Omaha Beach was fragmented. The wall still stood physically, but its defenders were isolated pockets rather than a unified force. Inside the bunkers, the realization spread that survival no longer depended on orders or ideology, but on chance. The collapse did not arrive with a single order, a white flag, or the fall of a command post. It arrived quietly, internally, in the minds of the men who had believed they were standing on the edge of history as its gatekeepers. By late morning, on June 6, 1944, inside shattered bunkers and improvised command rooms, German officers began to understand something far more devastating than defeat in battle. They understood that the war itself had crossed a point of no return. Reports, fragmented and delayed, painted a picture that no longer aligned with doctrine or expectation. Landings were not isolated. They were not contained. Utah, Gold, Juno, sword names, many German defenders would only learn later were all aflame. Airborne troops had fallen behind the lines during the night, cutting roads, capturing bridges, and spreading confusion far beyond the beaches. The Atlantic Wall had not been breached at one point. It had been rendered irrelevant across an entire front. A confidential detail from recovered German staff diaries reveals that as early as midday on June 6th, several mid-level officers privately wrote words they would never dare send upward. This cannot be stopped. These diaries, hidden for years, show that realism arrived faster at the front than at headquarters. The men closest to the fighting understood before anyone else that Germany no longer controlled events. Perhaps the most corrosive realization was not the strength of the Allies, but the failure of German leadership. Hitler's insistence on personally controlling armored reserves meant that panzer divisions, desperately needed in the first critical hours, remained immobilized by indecision. Frontline commanders sent urgent requests that went unanswered. When permission finally came, it was too late. Roads were clogged, bridges destroyed, skies dominated by Allied aircraft. This delay created a profound emotional rupture. German soldiers had been taught that discipline and obedience guaranteed victory. On D-Day, they discovered that obedience could also guarantee annihilation. A little-known psychological report compiled by German military doctors weeks later described a sharp increase in fatalism among surviving Normandy units beginning on June 6th itself. Men spoke less of victory and more of survival, captivity, or death. Inside the bunkers, certainty dissolved into exhaustion. Ammunition ran low. Water supplies were contaminated by dust and smoke. Wounded men lay unattended as medics were killed or overwhelmed. The constant thunder of naval guns created a sense of timelessness. Day and night blurred together. Some soldiers later said they felt as though the world beyond the bunker no longer existed. There were also moments of bitter clarity. Officers realized that the Atlantic Wall, presented as a masterpiece of engineering, had been a political symbol more than a military one. Many defensive positions lacked depth, mobility, and coordination. The wall was strong only if the enemy behaved as expected and the Allies did not. A rarely discussed fact is that several German officers deliberately destroyed maps, codebooks, and documents not because they expected immediate capture, but because they no longer believed reinforcements would ever arrive. This quiet preparation for defeat speaks volumes about the internal shift taking place. As afternoon turned to evening, the meaning of the day settled heavily on the survivors. This was not another battle like those in Russia or Italy. This was the opening of a permanent front. The Reich, already bleeding in the east, could not sustain this blow. The realization spread without words, carried in glances and silence. The war was lost, it just had not ended yet. The collapse of certainty was not dramatic. It was intimate. It happened inside individual minds, one by one. And once certainty died, everything else, discipline, belief, purpose, began to die with it. For those German soldiers who survived June 6, 1944, memory became heavier than any weapon they carried that day. Long after the guns fell silent, the images remained, the sea filled with ships, the trembling concrete, the wounded calling out in languages they barely understood. D-Day did not end when night fell. It followed them into captivity, into post-war silence, into old age. In post-war interviews conducted quietly by Allied historians, many former German soldiers struggled to describe the day. Not because they lacked words, but because the experience resisted narrative. Unlike victorious armies, they had no story of triumph to organize memory around. What remained was sensation, sound, fear, helplessness. One recurring image appears across dozens of testimonies to the horizon. Veterans spoke of it as if it were alive, as if it had moved toward them. The moment the fleet appeared marked the emotional beginning of the end. Some said that everything after that felt inevitable. Mechanical, stripped of choice. A little-known fact is that several German veterans of Normandy later participated anonymously in Allied-sponsored historical reconstructions of D-Day. Their input helped correct misconceptions about bunker layouts, firing arcs, and troop behavior. Yet their names were often omitted, their contributions absorbed quietly into official history. Emotionally, many carried a sense of abandonment. They believed they had been left to face overwhelming force with inadequate resources. This feeling hardened into resentment, not toward the enemy, but toward their own leaders. Post-war German psychologists noted that Normandy veterans displayed unusually high levels of distrust toward authority. Even decades later, there was also guilt. Not ideological guilt, but human guilt. Some recalled seeing wounded Allied soldiers drowning in the surf and feeling powerless to intervene. Others remembered moments of hesitation that haunted them long after. These memories complicated the simplistic image of defender and attacker. As years passed, silence became common. Many veterans avoided discussing Normandy, even with family. The day was too large to final. It represented not just a military defeat, but the collapse of a worldview built on obedience, certainty, and promised victory. The phrase, "the longest day," acquired a different meaning from the bunkers. It was long not because of hours, but because it never truly ended. It stretched across lifetimes, shaping how survivors understood war, authority, and themselves. In the end, D-Day, from the German perspective, is not a story of villains or heroes. It is a story of realization, the moment when history becomes undeniable, when belief collapses under reality. The Atlantic Wall fell first in the mind, then on the ground. And in that collapse, the war's outcome became irreversible.